good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Penang's long-debated Pan Island Link 1 highway has made headlines again, as it was recently revealed that the federal government is considering funding the 7.5 billion ringgit project under the 12th Malaysia Plan. The Penang State Government says that the 19.5 kilometre 6-lane highway will be critical for reducing traffic congestion. However, activists warn it could harm the environment and undercut the success of the planned LRT system. So is the PIL1 the right path forward for Penang? Well, joining us now on the show is Zairil Khir Johari, who is the Penang State Government Exco member for Infrastructure, Transport and Digital. Zairil, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Can you begin by explaining what the rationale is behind the constructing the Pan Island Link Highway when there's already a planned LRT system in place?
Sure, thank you, Melissa. I think I'd like to begin with a statement of fact, and that is that the Penang road network is severely underdeveloped. I mean, that's actually the reality of the situation. And the reasons are, obviously historical. Penang is very old. Georgetown is the first city in Malaysia. And we obviously, anyone who has been to Penang can tell you we have, huge space constraints. And this is owing to the fact that the urban footprint of Penang Island is only roughly about 30%. I mean, if you look at from Google Earth, satellite views will show you that 70% of the island remains green, still hills. And also due to lack of funds, particularly from the federal government for many, many years, it meant that infrastructure development in Penang could not keep up or at least keep pace with economic development. And so if you look at the situation in Penang today, we only really have one spinal highway traversing the vertical corridor from north to south, and that is the Lim Chong Yu Expressway, and that goes along the coast. So what we really need right now is an alternative spinal highway, and in this case the PIL1, which is designed to be an outer ring road. I mean, if you look at most cities around the world, they all have middle ring roads, outer ring roads. Penang lacks one, and so this essentially is meant to be an alternative to ease the redistribution and dispersal of traffic.
Okay, what about concerns that it could undermine ridership of the LRT? Are you concerned about that?
The short answer is no, because you will always need both public transport and roads. I give a very relatable example, which is London. I think many of us are familiar. And in London, as you know, there is an extensive public transport infrastructure network. You've got the London Underground, the London Overground, the DLR. You've got a really good and efficient London bus network as well. I myself, from my days as a student, until today, I use the London buses all the time whenever I'm there. But yet, you'd be surprised to know that public transport mode share in the City of London is only over 20%. That's less than 30%. Despite not only having good public transport infrastructure, you also have many disincentives such as congestion charge and low emission charges. Just to enter the City of London by car, you have to pay £15. Imagine paying 100 ringgit to enter Georgetown, or even 15 ringgit, right? But despite these disincentives, despite them putting all sorts of charges and making available so much public transport infrastructure, private vehicles remain the #1 mode share in London, with over 40%. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is the fact that you can't really take away the fact that people will drive cars, despite, you can have the best public transport infrastructure, but still, there will be people who drive cars, and people who drive cars obviously also need roads. In the case of Penang, our current public transport mode share is only about 4 to 5%. That's very low. And so even with the LRT, if we manage to increase it to 15%, 20%, and that will be a huge significant difference, there will still be that 80% who are still using private vehicles and who will then congest the roads if there are no other alternatives. And even if we eventually achieve our target of 40% public transport mode share, there will still be that 60% who will be using private vehicles, and obviously they need roads. And don't forget, buses need roads as well. And I mean, another city closer to home that also continually invests in both public transport as well as highway building is Singapore. So I think you have to put it all into consideration and into context.
Okay, so a couple of questions from that. So let's talk a little bit about the, you talked about Singapore and London using that as an example of having both public transport and investment into highways and roads. But you mentioned congestion pricing, high vehicle taxes, caps on car ownership in Singapore. Is Penang going to be considering similar measures? Because you can't have you can't build both highways and public transport without disincentivizing one and incentivizing the other.
I, for one, am in favor of thinking along those lines. I think in order to make public transport a success, you will definitely need both push factors as well as pull factors, right? So you need to encourage people to use public transport, but at the same time, you need to have these disincentives, as you mentioned. So, I mean, I'm just throwing ideas out here. Even if the PIL1 was built, for example, there could be even a toll mechanism. I'm not saying there will be, but I'm saying it's something to think about, not merely as a way to recoup investment, but maybe as a form of charge, right, to encourage public transport use, for example. So, these are tools and mechanisms that could be introduced once there are sufficient alternatives. So once the LRT is in place, once we have a better public transport system, and once we have more road alternatives, then I think the government would be able to experiment with using these tools, such as congestion charges, reviewing parking fees, for example, removing on-street parking. All these things can be done once alternatives are in place. And certainly, we would consider.
Right, you mentioned also a bit earlier that buses use roads too, and I think that's important because while that's true, I think buses rely on having dedicated infrastructure to be effective, bus lanes and priority signaling and all that. How much of PIL1's design will be optimized for public transit use rather than private vehicle use? That's
a really great question. I think, first of all, we could there is a possibility of designing PIL1 to have dedicated lanes for public transport, such as buses. But even if it doesn't, there's also the fact that if you have PIL1 as an alternative, you could then free up a lane on all the roads in Georgetown for dedicated buses. If we were to do that right now without the PIL1 as an alternative, you just completely, jam up the entire city infrastructure. But having that alternative again gives us that freedom to implement things like dedicated bus lanes.
Can I also ask you about the EIA, because that was the main concern civil society had around this project. Are you, the state government, going to be conducting another environmental impact assessment for this highway project before moving forward with any progress?
Gained EIA approval in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, and that has since lapsed. So yes, if this project were to go ahead, we will definitely have to restart and redo the EIA.
Okay, and that will be made public?
Oh, I mean, of course, and there will be public engagement sessions, as with all EIAs.
Okay. Can I ask you, Zairil, how you understand, what do you understand to be civil society's concerns about this project, and how would you address them?
I mean, we all love civil society in Penang, don't we? And I think chief among the concerns is environmental. And we are very well aware of that. I think in everything that we do, we try our best to alleviate and address these concerns, just like in whatever projects we're doing, whether it's LRT or Silicon Island, and same with the PIL1. And I think in the case of PIL1, the approach is to design it to be as environmentally conscious as possible. So hence the use of tunneling and cable-stayed bridges to minimize the impact on the environment. Of course, due care will be given to safeguard the water catchments, reduce risk of landslides, and I guess obviously they also, as you mentioned earlier, there are concerns about PIL1 and LRT competing. Although we actually see synergies, potential for synergies there. It's more complementary, and as I said, having the PIL1 would actually give us room and also the ability to then use other means of disincentives and tools that we can use to encourage public transport and reduce people using cars in the city.
Are there no other options on the table beyond the PIL1 for achieving all the objectives that you've laid out for us earlier? Is PIL1, is creating or constructing new roads and highways the only option forward for Penang?
I think it's the best option on the table because it's one that's also long overdue. The PIL1 is not a new idea or a new project. It's been on the cards for, I don't know, a few decades, the last few decades. In fact, we weren't the ones that originally planned the Penang Outer Ring Road. But the whole idea is that you at least need to serve the basic needs. And as I said, in Penang Island today, you only have that one highway, right? So at least if you have two, and then even if you want to do anything else, you have to get the basics right. And right now, as we know, it's completely congested during peak hour, during holidays, and without having that alternative, it just get worse. And even with having the LRT, as I said, you could get 20, 30, best case 40% cars off the road. There's still a lot of cars left that you need to cater for.
Zairil, thank you so much for being on the show with me. I appreciate your time. That was Penang State Exco member Zairil Khir Johari. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our conversation about Penang's Pan Island Link 1 highway. This as the federal government is currently considering funding the 7.5 billion ringgit project under the 12th Malaysia Plan. Joining me on the show now is Dr Lim Mah Hui, who is a member of Penang Forum. He is also a former Penang Island City Councillor. Dr Lim, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Given the severe traffic congestion that we know happens on Penang Island, I think a lot of people might see the PIL1 project as a welcome solution to Penang's traffic woes. I'm just wondering, given your public comments objecting to the project, why is it that you believe this highway is not the right approach to do so?
Yeah, I think it's not the right approach because the idea of building more roads and highways as a way to solve traffic congestion is fundamentally flawed. And this is so important to understand. And this is proven both from the point of theory as well as from the point of practice. From the point of theory, it seems counterintuitive that if you increase the supply of road, then you solve the traffic problem. But a German mathematician in 1968, right, it simulated complex simulation of traffic congestion. And he demonstrated that actually in most cases that building more roads just ultimately adds to more traffic. Because in the first few years, you can decongest the road. You can decongest it. But then it encourages travel because it makes it easy. And therefore, the demand will increase. Or in economics, we have a law called the Say's law, where is it the supply creates its demand, and this is exactly the situation, right? And in practice, actually, it's quite evident to us. Let's take for Penangites Green Lane. Many years ago there were 2 lanes, and people were griping, saying, "Oh, there's a lot of traffic jam." So they extended to 4 lanes, and then there was still traffic congestion. And then most recently, 6 years or 8 years ago, they got 6 lanes, and we still have more traffic. So where does it get us, right? And you look at KL and Manila and Bangkok, they have highways, super highways, spaghetti highways. And what do? We have it. So, in theory and in practice, it's a failed solution. Now,
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, if I just may interject very quickly. So if you disagree with the PIL in terms of it as a solution for traffic congestion, what would then be your evidence-based alternative to achieve the same goals?
Okay. But before that, I want to make some quotations, which is very, very important for the listeners. See, the die-hard proponents of PIL 1 today were the strongest opponents of its predecessor, the PORR, which has the same alignment, the Penang Outer Ring Road, 22 years ago. Then Chow Kong Yao was the politician, the opposition politician, and Lim Kit Siang, both in 2002, stated that they were against the POR because, citing the Helcro report, right, which concluded that after 8 years of completion of POR, the traffic volume would increase so fast that it will overwhelm the capacities of the existing roads, resulting in reduced vehicle speed and longer time travel. These are the exact words of the DAP stalwarts. Today, they are the strongest proponent. Now, this is unbelievable, isn't it? Now, the same issue, right, was highlighted by the traffic consultants in the last EIA, which has expired. And I quote them on volume 8 of page 81 of the EIA. It states that after 7 years of construction, and God forbid how much disruption it would cause to the public, and within 5 years after the completion of PIL, it says the peak morning and evening hours of traffic will reach a level of service of F, which means we're back to a congested highway. So, where does it take us? I mean, and I want to mention two other unintended consequences of PIL. One, which Zairil have often stated, and I presume he stated again in the interview, that it would complement the LRT which they're going to build, which is going to cost us something like 10 billion. Right. While it may complement, actually it competes with and cannibalizes ridership from the LRT. Why? Because, again, the EIA report of PIL says that it will reduce the driving time between Gurney Road and FTZ area of the Free Trade Zone and Island from 45 minutes to 15 minutes, right? So now, you are a driver. Do you think then you want to take the LRT, which will take 45 minutes from Komta to the airport, not counting your time taken to go to Komta, or you want to drive from Gurney, Tanjong Tokong, where I live, to the airport in 15 minutes?
Right. Dr. Lim, if I may interject here, and you're right, he did mention that, but I want to talk to you about that key point that you raised, the connectivity to key industrial hubs. Now, are there other alternatives to achieving this improved connectivity from the Free Industrial Zone and Penang Airport to the city centre, which is key for commercial activity? Can it still be achieved without major road infrastructure projects like the PIL one?
Yes, of course. I will get to that. But before that, I want to highlight another problem of PIL. That, while it decreases the travel time between urban centers, that is Gurney area, which is urban center, and Bayan Lepas as the urban center, to 15 minutes, what it does, it will worsen the traffic situation within the urban centers. Studies have done to show that when you build highways, every 2-lane highway that you build, on average, will bring about 10,000 extra vehicles per day on the street. So this is the problem. So these two problems, it cannibalizes, and will defeat ridership in LRT, and then it will increase traffic congestion within the urban areas. then I can go back now to the next the question you raised. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we tackle this problem? You know, it's as simple as that. That you basically have to increase public transportation. How do we analyze traffic problem and traffic issue? You must look at this as an equation. The equation has two sides, on the left and right. So on the left side is a demand for the road use, and on the right is the supply. Now what the Penang State Government does is to basically increase the supply side, right? Build more roads and build more roads. It does very little, if not nothing, or next to nothing, on the demand side. You have to control the demand side. There's no doubt to that. You know, if you don't control the demand side, you increase the supply side, then basically you come back to square one. So what they have to do is to push people and passengers away from cars to public transport through incentives and disincentives. Now, finding the right, they say, okay, we want to have public transport. Then the next question is, what is the right and appropriate type of public transport system? Is it buses? Is it trams? Is it LRT, MRT, water taxis, and all the stuff? You know, you really have to study it carefully. You don't just use LRT because you're envious that, you know, KL has an LRT, right? Now, so the LRT, I want to speak about that, you know, is something that does not, right, really fit well mainly with Penang for two basic reasons, or three basic. One is that there is going to be excess capacity. You know, the ridership will be so low that it will be a humongous financial burden on the state government and the federal government. Okay, and the LRT's experience in KL bears to it that, you know, the original LRT which were conceived and implemented 25 years ago, only one line has reached its projected, what you call, ridership after 25 years. So that's a big problem. Secondly, it has to be environmentally and ecologically appropriate. Penang is a charming city. You don't want to have, you know, huge pylons, you know, intruding into our city center and all that. So it is just not the right system.
Right. On that note, Dr. Lim, do you think that the PIL1 and the LRT, I mean the big infrastructure projects for transportation in Penang, is that a symptom of the broader urban planning challenges that the island in particular faces?
It is. Because I think basically our government likes to have not the planning and implementation is not based on evidence. It's not an evidence-based planning. It's a vested interest-based planning. Let me give you the example, right? We spent about 3.5 million ringgit actually at the initiative of Penang Forum and NGOs that requested the government of Penang to have a master transport plan, right? So we hired a health crew which took 1.5 to 2 years to do the transport master plan. Okay? And they came up with a pretty good transport master plan, in which the sum total of, that was like 15 years ago, okay, of the public transportation system, which includes trams, buses, water taxis and all that, was something about 10 billion ringgit. Okay? There was no such thing as an LRT. But then when it went, you know, to another proponent, which was Gamuda, they came back with a modified transport master plan, which calls for LRT. And that one LRT, one line alone, at that time was going to cost us about 7 billion ringgit. Today it's 10 billion ringgit. So if the government had followed the evidence-based transport master plan, they could have had a good public transport system for 10 billion ringgit. Today we want to throw 10 billion on one LRT line, which will not, I repeat, solve the traffic problem, because you need more than just one arterial line. You need connectivity, first mile, last mile, you know, and all those issues that are not addressed. And, you know, the money, even just a portion of the money that we're going to spend, say, on this appeal of 7 to 8 to 10 billion, can be used to address all those other issues, you know, connectivity, good sheltered pedestrian walkway, bicycle lanes. You know, in Singapore, their policy is that no community is more than 10-15 minutes walk away from either a bus stop or a MRT stop. What do we have? We have 22 stations. And is it connected to the high density area, Fa Lim, Jelutong, or does it connect to basically, you know, the light, Penang light, which is, you know, upscale area? So these are important issues.
Right. Dr. Lim, thank you so much for sharing your opinions with us. I appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the show, and that wraps it up for this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.